No, you can't attack. You can't attack. He has only 2 cards in hand.
What is on top of the deck? What is on top?
Come on, man. Flip it.
Oh, it's Lightning Helix! Oh my god!
That cost him the game. That cost him the game.
That can cost.
How's it going, everyone? This is Boots with Snapkeep Arcade, back with another deck tech for competitive and quick constructed. This week we have a special guest, Spencer Howland of the Constructed Criticism podcast. I've known Spencer since I first started playing Magic in 2013, and he helped me understand the game on a deeper level and helped me transition into a more competitive player. Thank you so much for coming on Snapkeep Arcade, Spencer. I'll have you start by introducing yourself and giving us your background in Magic.
Yeah, so my name is Spencer Howland. I'm the host of Constructed Criticism and the producer of Common Knowledge and Limited Time Only, 3 podcasts about getting better at Magic the Gathering. I've competed on the Pro Tour. I'm a 2-time state champion in Utah. I'm a member of multiple testing teams that have done really well locally, and then even produced multiple Silver Pros and even a Gold Pro. So I consider myself a brewer. I like to tune decks that I think are really good in the metagame, all the way from winning states with Jund in Returned Around Mega Standard before it was a deck, and then coming up with a transformational sideboard for Aetherworks Marvel before it got banned, winning states with those 2 decks, and then qualifying for the Pro Tour for my first Pro Tour with a teamer brew that we tested for the Pro Tour before that RPTQ. So no, I've been playing Magic since Worldwide came out, and then started playing my first PTQs in the first modern season that had ever existed for PTQs, top 8ing my second PTQ ever, and at one point when the ELO system existed, I was the #1 constructed rated player in the state and one of the top 150 constructed players in the world. Kind of an older school player for a lot of the newer players, but still I'm very in Magic and I really enjoy the game.
All right, awesome. So tell us about the deck.
Yeah, so I want to talk about blue-eye control today, and I specifically want to talk about just straight blue-eye control. So in Standard right now, you have lots of variants of control. You have Esper, you even have some Jeskai decks that do well at the Pro Tour, you have straight blue-black control, and one of the things that I think is the most powerful thing you can be doing in Standard, and when my friends were asking me what I would play at the Pro Tour, I very clearly said I would just play the best Teferi deck that I can find. And going into the RPTQ in 2 weeks from now, I haven't changed my mind. I think Teferi is one of the best cards in Standard, and that's where I want to be.
Yeah, I've been playing this deck in competitive constructed since the Kaladesh update, and its power level is definitely there. So what's the overall strategy of the deck?
The overall strategy of blue-eye control is pretty simple. You are a Teferi deck. So Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, is a 5-mana planeswalker that does a lot of really cool things. But one of the coolest things that was discovered about it is that you can actually target itself with its own ability to put 3 cards down, and you can actually win the game that way. But one of the coolest things about blue-eye control, and what it's basically trying to do, is say, I'm going to clear your board with things like Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate, counter your spells with Syncopates, Disallows, and some Essence Scatters and Negates, and then making sure the board stays clear of like problematic permanents with things like Cast Out and Commits Memory, and then I'm going to close the door by casting Hieroglyphic Illumination to pull from tomorrow. And when you do that, and it executes well, there's basically no deck in Standard that can beat you.
So Teferi is your main win condition. Can you tell us more about the card?
Yeah, so one of the cool tips that you could know about the card is you ultimate Teferi with Teferi either still in play or another one with hand. And ultimating a Planeswalker means that you use its final big giant ability. And Teferi's big giant ability is whenever you draw a card, you may exile target permanent. So what you do is you ultimate it, then you either cast a memory from your graveyard, both players shuffle their libraries and their graveyards together, and they both draw 7 cards. So then you exile all of their lands, or you cast a pull from draw for like 10 and exile all their creatures and lands. Then they have no more permanents in play. So even if you have less cards than your opponent at this point in the game, you have that Teferi in play or another one in your hand, and then at the end of the game you just play a Teferi or target your own Teferi and make it the last card in your deck every single turn to continue to exile their permanents until they run out of cards. And it's a really slow way to win the game, which is why we'll probably talk about some of the differences in my deck list than other deck lists for kind of a little bit more user friendly than those who aren't pure control players. Great,
so let's go over the deck list.
I'm going to read the deck list top to bottom, and then I'll talk about each card individually. So right now, if I'm going to play this deck tomorrow, I'm going to play 1 Torrential Gearhulk, 2 Cast Out, 3 Seal Away, 2 Search for Azcanta, 1 Negate, 1 Pull from Tomorrow, 2 Blink of an Eye, 4 Disallow, 2 Syncopate, 3 Settle the Wreckage, 2 Essence Scatter, 1 Commit to Memory, 2 Hieroglyphic Illumination, 4 Teferi, 1 Gideon of the Trials, 2 Fumigate, and then an assortment of land being 2 Field of Ruin, 4 Irrigated Farmland, 2 Memory of Genius, 4 Glacial Fortress, 6 Islands, 7 Plains, and then 2 Ipnu Rivulet.
Okay, so let's get into the specific cards and why you play them.
So I'd like to kind of talk about the cards in groups, if that's okay. I think that what's important when you look at a deck like this isn't even what your 60 or your 75 is, but actually like why you are including the cards you're including, right? So one of the things that we can look at is our draw spells first. So we have 1 Commit Memory, 2 Hieroglyphic Illumination, and 1 Pull from Tomorrow. And you'll notice that I'm playing Hieroglyphic Illumination. And the reason for this inclusion is to let me maximize my mana early and then flash it back with that one of Torrential Gearhulk later in the game if I need to get even more cards. And one of the reasons that this is cool is that while we talked about that really awesome Teferi plan of like exiling all of your opponent's permanents and winning that way, sometimes it's super slow. I included 1 Gideon of the Trials and 1 Torrential Gearhulk to really help you out with that. Now, most of these blue-white control decks, they don't even play any creatures, and the reason for that is to make sure that your opponent's removal spells don't do anything. So by including that Torrential Gearhulk in the competitive landscape of Magic, if you don't play that Torrential Gearhulk, they're going to board out all of their removal against you because they really don't expect you to be playing any creatures. So you can gain an advantage with that Torrential Gearhulk, and not only that, but you can play this Torrential Gearhulk so late in the game with this deck that you can have that Negate backup or that Disallow backup anyway and gain huge advantage and close out the game quicker than you could have done with Teferi. And the same thing is true of Gideon of the Trials. These are both alternative win conditions that are really good against multiple decks that allow you to win games quickly instead of having to wait for your opponent to draw their entire deck. And the reason that that's important with Hieroglyphic Illumination, Commit to Memory, and Pull from Tomorrow is that these cards are there to shut the door, right? So when I cast a Pull from Tomorrow for 6, I'm trying to win the game right away. I'm trying to say, I have gotten to the point where I get to cast this card, and now the game's over, because even though my life totals may be lower than yours, and you still have permanents in play, there's no way you're getting through these 7 cards that I drew. And Torrential Gearhulk kind of does the same thing, where Gideon on the other side acts as a removal spell and then a win condition once you're ready to close the game out. And one of the key points of control decks is trying to pivot, and they both allow you to do that. The next thing that I think we should talk about is the counterspell suite. So we have 2 Syncopate, 4 Disallow, 1 Negate, and 2 Essence Scatter. And the reason that I picked this removal is for a few reasons. I think that having enough hard counters is really important. So a hard counter is the thing that just says no, right? And we think of those when we think of like Essence Scatter, Disallow, Negate. When you cast that card and it resolves, they just don't get their card. And Syncopate is a soft counter. It means that it doesn't always just counter the spell. They get a choice. Sometimes it does, right? They just don't actually have enough mana, but it's not always a hard counter. Seal Away is an amazing card, and it's not a card that we would typically get. These cards allow you to have enough cheap interaction to play the game against aggressive decks and enough hard counters to stop the haymaker plays of mid-range decks. And kind of understanding why you're playing the counter spells you're playing is important. Syncopate being a 2 is on purpose, right? I don't want 4 Syncopates in my deck because if I draw 4 Syncopates, the later the game goes, the worse that card gets because I have to tap more and more mana to stop my opponent's spells. Whereas something like Essence Scatter and Negate, I just have to understand what the metagame looks like and attack it appropriately with the right number of these counter spells. One thing that I want to talk about with these counter spells, and actually with Search for Azcanta and some of the lands as well, is actually Teferi, Gear of Dominaria. Teferi has an ability to draw a card and untap 2 of your lands. And one of the really cool things about this deck is it plays Search for Azcanta. It's a 2-mana enchantment that when it flips into a land, lets you pay 3 and tap it to look at the top 3 cards of your library and then pick a non-land card from that and put it into your hand. And with Teferi, you get to do that twice a turn, so it gains you tons of card advantage once the game is taken over, which is really important. And the way that the game gets taken over is from those draw spells and then from those Fumigates and those Settle the Wreckages. They really close the door on your opponents and don't allow them to really get in with big chunks of damage. Then the last pieces of the deck are the Blink of an Eye, the Seal Aways, and the Cast Outs. So Cast Out is a catch-all. It's to say, I had to tap out for a Teferi, and you got to get a spell in around my counterspells. Now I'm just going to get rid of that, untap with Teferi with a counterspell now. When you look at something like Seal Away, this card's just great. So much of Magic right now is about attacking. So if they're going to attack, the creatures need to be tapped, and you have a 2-mana kill spell, it actually exiles those cards, which is really important against things like Rekindling Phoenix or Hazaret, things like that. And then Blink of an Eye is kind of a catch-all. I can't count the number of times that I blink and divide my own thing too. Maybe I'm protecting my Torrential Gearhulk, maybe I'm protecting my Gideon, maybe I'm protecting my Teferi, but also I'm just saying like, all right, I'm going to do this turn. I'm going to reset this, pay 4 mana because it has kicker. I'm going to put that back in your hand. I'm going to draw a card, and then I'm going to untap, and hopefully I now have a counterspell to stop you. And that's pretty cool. And that's kind of what the main deck is trying to do against all of its major pieces.
Can you give us some tips and tricks for the deck?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest tip and trick is obviously the Teferi trick, but I would also say that one of the things that you really need to think about as Standard gets into MTG Arena is probably going to be things like the approach decks or understanding how your commit to memories interact with your lands. So one of the things that we have here is we have those Ipnu Rivulets. And they're really important because they let you top things with that commit to memory and then get rid of them forever. Or they let you activate your Ipnu Rivulet to get rid of their Approach of the Second Sun, which could be a problem for you if you don't have things like Negate in game one. Some of the other tips and tricks is obviously that Blink of an Eye effect. Don't be afraid to Blink of an Eye your own thing. Maybe they played a much bigger threat and you need a Blink of an Eye your own seal away and then seal away that thing to get rid of it forever. That's a really cool thing that you got to do with the power of something like Blink of an Eye. And then one thing that I would say is really understand how your counter spells line up against your opponents, because that's a pretty big deal. And understanding like, why am I countering this spell? Is it important for me to counter it? Is going to be really important while you're playing a control deck. Because if you counter the wrong thing and then some big 4-mana spell resolves against your control deck and you don't have a cast out or a commit to memory, it's going to be a problem for you.
Let's go over the sideboard. Can you give us the main reasoning for each card in the board?
Yeah, that's totally cool. So one of the things about this sideboard for blue-white control that I really like is that you're really going to maximize your sideboard slot. So we have 1 Sorcerous Spyglass, 3 Knight of Grace, 2 Lyra Dawnbringer, 1 Aether Meltdown, 3 History of Benalia, 2 Negate, 1 Invoke the Divine, 1 Forsake the Worldly, and 1 Fumigate. The Fumigate is basically 4 green decks. You know, one of the ways that you lose to green decks, especially like green-black decks, is they duress you, you're in big trouble, you had that, Settle the Wreckage in your hand and now it's gone, and you really need to maximize the number of sweepers. One of the things that I think that people think Fumigate is really good against is those red aggressive decks, and I actually don't think that's true. I think that it's a trap to board in your 5-mana sweeper that you might not even hit your land drop to kill all those creatures with, and then these red aggressive decks that people are playing today with things like Hazoret and Rekindling Phoenix, Fumigate's not even good against them. So that's a trap that I think that you should avoid. Invoke the Divine and Forsake the Worldly split. These are for the vehicles decks. I would even bring in 1 in the mirror to try and kill other cast outs and things like that. And then Negate is very much for the mirror match. You get to go up to 3 Negates with your Forsake the Worldlies and things like that. But another thing that this deck sideboard does really well, those 3 Knight of the Graces, those 2 Lyra Dawnbringers, and those 3 History of Benalias really makes you a transformational sideboard. You can transform your deck into blue-white mid-range instead of blue-white control whenever you want with this sideboard. And that happens by understanding, did they board out all of their removal against me and their sweepers? And if you think they did, you can pull the trigger and immediately punish them for it. Because now they have no way to stop all these cards from attacking them and killing them. Instead, they're focused on trying to either beat you in the long game or be super aggressive, which all of these cards are very good at both offense and defense, right? So if they're being super aggressive, History of Benalia becomes card advantage, Knight of Grace has first strike, and Lyra is obviously good against both. And if they boarded out all of their removal, there's basically no way to stop you from just killing them with these creatures. Sorcerous Spyglass basically comes in against the mirror and maybe vehicles depending on how you think they've boarded. One of the things about control decks, and one of the things that is really hard to understand, is you do have to try and figure out what your opponent's trying to do. If you don't know what they're doing, sideboarding is going to become really hard, and understanding what your configuration needs to be, just like your main deck, is just as important after sideboard. You're going to name Teferi almost every single time. One of the things that I talked about, right, are those enchantment and artifact destruction spells. If they're not boarding those in, that Sorcerous Spyglass is going to cost them maybe something like a cast out, which just means that your Teferis are going to be even better.
So would you bring in Forsake the Worldly and Invoke the Divine in the mirror match?
Yeah, I would. I think that being able to kill cast outs and other Sorcerous Spyglass and History of Benalia is something that they're probably going to be boarding into. And Torrential Gearhulk, like, there's so much in the mirror, both of enchantments and artifacts, that you probably don't realize that you want to be able to kill. And you can kill their cast out to get your Teferi back, right? Which is like just a huge game.
When would you bring in Aether Meltdown?
Yeah, Aether Meltdown is very specifically for decks attacking you quickly. It's just another 2-mana removal spell that also happens to hit Heart of Kiran.
All right, so that's blue-white Teferi control. Thank you so much for joining us on Snapkeep Arcade for this deck tech, Spencer. Let everyone know about your podcast, Constructed Criticism, and where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So constructorcriticism.com is a great place to find Magic content about getting better at the game. You know, we do 3 podcasts every week that I mentioned earlier, and now we even have a new video series called Constructor Clash, where myself and my technical producer Mason Clark both play heads up Magic the Gathering online head-to-head, where we record both sides of the matchup separately, talk about all of our plays, our hands, what we're doing, and then one side is free and the other side's on Patreon. And if you're interested, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg to see the other stuff we're doing. It's been 4 years. I'm building a network that I'm really proud of, the things that we're doing and what our goal is. You know, Andrew and I both worked at this really awesome company that taught us about always improving, and I really adopted that into the mindset of constructive criticism and what we stand for. And we just always want to be getting better. Magic's a really hard game. It's basically impossible to play correctly, and you know, you just want to be doing what you can all the time to be improving yourself, and that's kind of what we stand for.
Thanks again to Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism for this deck tech. If you like this video, please subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.